Friends, brothers and sisters, let me first extend on behalf of Habitat Forum, that is INHAF, and the partner organization, that's Mahila Housing SEWA Trust, and WeGo, a warm welcome to the participants and the discussants to this 34th webinar of the 40 plus webinar series we've been running for a while. As you know, this is the second dialogue on urban informal sector. Today's webinar focuses on women informal sector workers in our cities. As you know, yesterday's webinar presented city planning and urban informal sector. One of the fallout of the COVID-19 is the sharp focus on which the urban informal economy has surfaced. Going forward, beyond the virus crisis, the country will have to see that with nearly 90% of the labor force in the informal economy, their conditions of working, why the entire social contract must change. Also, we cannot leave the slum dwellers and other poor in the condition of ill health, misery, and want they are forced into. Moreover, with the climate change knocking on the door, if not already in, both the short-term problem solving and the long-term planning must reckon with the sustainability framework. With the cities contributing 65% to national GDP already, and urban population growth estimates suggesting 840 million people in the cities by 2050, which means almost doubling of the current urban population in 30 more years, India could ill afford underperformance in addressing the complex urban challenge. With all this, cities will need to be rethought, reorganized, and replanned. Changing all this is no small challenge, even if COVID-19 shock leaves us with a new mindset and fresh resolve to pursue change. This series of webinars, therefore, is seen as opening the much needed societal dialogue on how we handle urbanization processes and develop cities so that they remain engines of economic growth minus the exploitative instinct and damaging traits such as carbon footprint. Even if goal of economically productive, socially just, politically participatory, environmentally sustainable, culturally vibrant, technologically adaptive, and people-centric cities look a distant ideal at this stage, it must be worked on as our people deserve better cities to live, work, grow, and prosper. And making cities better and inclusive demands a wider societal partnership. Ensuring livable cities and meeting India's daunting urban challenge could not be the responsibility of the government alone. In finding better approaches and solutions, many more should participate and contribute. This webinar series is a small, modest effort in that direction. What we're trying to do is sharing with people dimensions of the urban challenge and bringing people together on a platform who could contribute new ideas and approaches. With that introductory kind of statement, I would hand over this to Renana Ben for next 90 to 120 minutes to conduct this very important webinar on informal sector, especially women. Thank you very much. Renana Ben?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Kirti Bhai. And I must say, and I hope people have been listening to the INHAF webinar series, which have been very innovative and bringing out real debate and discussion. This particular webinar, as the one before, has been organized by INHAF in collaboration with Mahila Housing SEWA Trust and WeGo. Mahila Housing SEWA Trust is a organization which grew out of the SEWA movement and is based in Ahmedabad and is a mix of technical work and the local voices from the informal sector. And so far has covered a variety of issues ranging from infrastructure provision to housing to climate change to employment. WeGo stands for Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing, and is an international network of researchers, activists, and policymakers working in 55 countries. Actually, both for Mahila Housing Trust and for WeGo, this is a landmark time. And Radhika, could you put up the two books, please? WeGo has completed 20 years. Radhika, can you put this here? WeGo has completed 20 years. And as part of its 20 years, it had brought out a volume on the informal economy, which is WeGo's main work. And Mahila Housing Trust has completed 25 years. And I'm also a co-author in tracing all the different activities, not just the activities, but how women themselves have changed their circumstances and changed the cities they live in. So that's the City Makers. And I'm very proud that these two volumes mark so many years, 2 decades, 2.5 decades of work. Today's meeting, today's webinar is also about both the informal economy and these women who are the city makers, the women in the informal economy. We have a very rich discussion today, and it is rich because it's not only, well, first of all, it is rich because the people who are going to be speaking, and I'll be introducing them one by one, are women, all of them women, who have worked in this space for, again, many, many decades, and so are both fully immersed in the subject and are experts on the subject, but also, and even more in a way enlightening, we will actually have women from the informal economy telling us about their lives. Women in the informal economy in the urban areas. If you go to any slum area, you go to any middle class area, you go to any construction site, you will find women working. Unfortunately, women in the urban areas, the workers in the urban areas are unfortunately invisible. I would like to tell you some figures which you won't believe. Officially, these are the official Government of India figures. Only 15% of women in urban areas and 15% of women from the ages of 15 to 60, only 15% are working, which according to the government only 85% are fully 85% are just domestic, do their domestic duties. Now, this is not true, because if you, as I said, if you go to any of the areas, you find that in fact women are working in so many different ways. The largest number of women workers are home-based workers, women within their house who manufacture products and services, maybe garments, maybe agarbatti, maybe papad, maybe any other food product. The second largest are domestic work. Actually, second largest are construction workers, and then are domestic workers. And then there are and most of them are women, home-based workers and domestic workers. Most of them are women. But there are substantial number of workers who are street vendors and substantial numbers who are waste collectors. Just to give you one example of the undercounting, I just got some figures for the city of Delhi. This is again official figures. According to the city of Delhi, according to the official figures, there are 12,000 street vendor women in Delhi. In the whole of Delhi, there are 12,000 street vendor women. SEWA works in Delhi, and SEWA alone in 7 areas of Delhi, just 7 areas out of about 23, have 15,000 members already. So it's like the women are working, but they do not exist. In this webinar, we hope to bring you one by one the actual women who are working. What is the attitude of the city towards them? How do they feel about the city? What have they done to improve their lot? And what do they think should be city policies to include these women, increase their productivity, and make them visible, responsible citizens? So I'm going to start. We have 4 speakers, or 4 sectors, I should say. The 4 sectors are home-based workers, domestic workers, street vendors, and waste collectors. So let me start first with the largest number, which is home-based workers. I'd like to introduce Janhavi Dave. Janhavi Ben is the international coordinator of an international network called HomeNet South Asia, working in the 8 countries of South Asia with women home-based workers. Along with Janhavi Ben is Asia Ben, Asia Sheikh. Asia Sheikh is from Mumbai, and Asia Sheikh is a home-based worker who will tell us about her life. So before I finish, let me just say one more thing, which is, may I request participants to keep their remarks and their questions in the Q&A, because the chat is not visible to everybody. So if you can do it in the Q&A, it'll be very useful. With that little logistic, let me hand it over to Janhavi Ben. Janhavi Dave, can I give it to you now?
Sure, thank you, Renana Ben. And I'm also going to share my presentation. It's a short one. So thank you, Renana Ben, INHAF, Mahila Housing SEWA Trust, and WeGo for inviting me to this webinar and introducing me. Before we start, Renana Ben has provided a bit about what HomeNet South Asia is, but I'll quickly introduce ourselves. We're a network of home-based worker organizations across all South Asian countries. We have 60 affiliates collectively representing over 900,000 home-based workers, of which 95% are women. Our members or affiliates are trade unions, producer companies, cooperatives, and other membership-based organizations of home-based workers. Renana had asked us to describe the sector that we work in. So a quick definition that home-based workers are workers who work from in and around their homes, producing goods or providing services. As they work from their own homes, generally isolated, it is difficult to get the exact numbers of home-based workers. But WeGo has this excellent statistics team, and they've come up with a statistical brief on India. And as per their brief, there are over 42 million home-based workers in India. I also wanted to mention that home-based workers work across sectors. Renana had also mentioned manufacturing, services, agriculture. They work in traditional sectors like weaving, embroidery, etc., but they also are present in newer trades like assembling motor parts, segregation of e-waste, and all of this is done from within their own homes. Their homes always double up as a workplace, and any impact on housing has a direct impact on their livelihoods. So say, for example, when workers were relocated to Saudagevra, a lot of them had lost their livelihoods. Or if there was lack of basic services in, say, for example, sewage in the case of Shantipalli in Bhubaneswar, where we worked, their houses tend to flood during monsoons, adversely impacting their livelihoods. While they primarily work in their private spaces, they also engage in public spaces. So, say, for example, accessing market to procure raw material or selling their finished goods. And a few organizations have also been successful in accessing community spaces as workspaces. The photograph that you see here is of a similar workspace in Nepal. Now, to talk specifically about women home-based workers, there are over 17 million home-based workers in India, lesser than men, but still a substantial number. The peak employment age of women home-based workers is between 25 to 44 years. This is also the age when women have a lot of care responsibilities, which is one of the reasons why women work as home-based workers. What we've also seen is that in the last 13 years, women home-based workers in urban areas have increased, especially in manufacturing of textiles, wearing apparel, and food products. What we've also found is that the hourly earnings of men home-based workers are twice as that of women home-based workers. I also wanted to mention that, for home-based workers, the location of their home is very important to access work, be it for access to markets or close proximity to the supply chains. It is no surprise that the city of Tirupur has over 40,000 home-based workers, all living in close proximity to factories. In our work, we've always probed on the reason why women choose to work as home-based workers. One of the first reasons provided is that it is not by choice, but for many, the only option of work that they have. There's absolutely no other employment opportunity that exists for them. The second reason is mobility issue. There's, of course, the reason that in patriarchal society as ours, many women are not allowed to work outside their own homes. But mobility also includes lack of safe and affordable public transport to go and work outside. In many rehabilitation colonies, women have mentioned this as one of the key reasons for home-based work. And the third key reason provided is unfair burden of care work, where they have to take care of children, and lack of affordable, reliable, and accessible childcare doesn't leave them with any other option. Another big part of care work also includes accessing water, especially in tier 2 cities. We've seen that. Many home-based workers spend a lot of time just to procure work, and that's a big part of their care work. I mean, I can go on much more on this, but we also joined by Asya Appa here. And Asya Appa will tell us more about the working conditions and how the city treats her. So Asya Appa, आप संक्षिप्त में आपका और आपका काम का परिचय दीजिए और बताएं कि शहर आपके प्रति किस तरह व्यवहार रखता है. आसिया अपा.
जी नमस्ते, मेरा नाम आसिया शेख है. मैं लर्न महिला कामगार संगठन में अकाउंट का काम करती हूँ और लर्न की सेक्रेटरी हूँ और मुंबई शहर धारावी में रहने वाली हूँ. और मैं एक घर बैठे कामगार हूँ जो घर में बैठ के लेडीज सूट सीने का काम करती हूँ. और हम लोग होमनेट साउथ एशिया से जुड़े हुए हैं. हमारी लर्न संस्था घर बैठे जो भी औरतें काम करती हैं, औरतों के साथ में मैं भी एक शामिल हूँ. मैं भी घर बैठ के काम करती हूँ. हम लोगों को बहुत सी परेशानियां होती हैं. हमारा घर छोटा होता है. छोटा होने की वजह से हम लोगों को बहुत सी परेशानियां करनी पड़ती है और घनी आबादी होती है. घनी आबादी होने की वजह से भी हम लोगों को परेशानी होती है. घर छोटा होता है. घर छोटे होने की वजह से हमारे घर में सूरज की रोशनी नहीं आती है. कुदरत की जो हवा जो हम लोग को नेचुरल मिलना चाहिए वो नहीं मिलती है। वो नहीं मिलने की वजह से क्या होता है कि हमारी सेहत पे असर पड़ता है, सेहत पे असर पड़ता है, और जो हम घर में बैठ के काम करते हैं उसमें भी हम पर असर पड़ता है, क्योंकि घर में रोशनी नहीं होती, सूरज की रोशनी नहीं होने की वजह से हम लोगों को दिन के उजालों में भी लाइट का इस्तेमाल करना पड़ता है, लाइट का इस्तेमाल करना पड़ता है। और आप लोगों को तो पता है कि आजकल लाइट की बिल कितनी ज्यादा आ रही है, लाइट की बिल आती है, और उसके वजह से लाइट की रोशनी में काम करने से हमारे आंखों पर भी असर पड़ता है। और घर बैठे जितनी भी औरतें, मैं भी हूँ उसमें शामिल हूँ, उसमें हम लोगों को काम करने में बहुत ही परेशानी का सामना करना पड़ता है। और उसके बाद क्या होता है कि हम लोगों को मतलब मटेरियल रखने के लिए, हमारा घर छोटा होता है, मटेरियल भी हम लोग अपने घर में रखने के लिए परेशानी होती है। परिवार बड़े होते हैं, घर छोटे होते हैं, तो उसकी वजह से हम लोग घर में भी मटेरियल ज्यादा से ज्यादा नहीं रख सकते। और कहीं जाके मटेरियल लाने में भी हमको परेशानी होती है, क्योंकि 1 किलोमीटर या 2 किलोमीटर दूर ऐसा हम लोगों को मटेरियल मिलता है, तो वहां जाने के लिए बेस्टी बस या ट्रेन का तो सुविधा मिलती नहीं है, और हमारे पास इतना पैसा नहीं होता कि हम रिक्शा या टैक्सी करके जाएं, उसमें हम लोगों को पैदल जाना होता है। पैदल जाने की वजह से क्या होता है कि बारिश या गर्मी में हम लोगों को परेशानी होती है। परेशानी इसलिए होती है कि बारिश में जो भी मटेरियल हम लोग लेकर आते हैं वो हमारा मटेरियल बारिश के पानी की वजह से भीग जाता है, और गर्मी में गर्मी का एहसास होता है। और ऐसा भी नहीं होता कि चलो ट्रांसपोर्ट की हम लोग के पास सहूलियत नहीं तो थोड़ा ज्यादा ला के रख लें, ये भी हम लोग नहीं कर सकते, क्योंकि हमारा घर छोटा होता है, हम ज्यादा भी सामान नहीं ला सकते, इसमें भी हम लोगों को परेशानी होती। और इसके अलावा क्या होता है कि आजकल जो ये महामारी फैली हुई है, महामारी में पुलिस सरकार जो एक योजना चालू की है कि बाहर मत निकलो, उसमें क्या होता है कि जब हम लोग के घर छोटे हैं तो हमारे घर में बाथरूम नहीं है, तो हमको शौचालय के लिए बाहर जाना होता है। बाहर जाने की वजह से पुलिस हम लोगों को मारती है, लेकिन वो मार खाते हुए भी हम लोग को शौचालय जाना ही पड़ता है। अगर नहीं गए तो हम लोग की सेहत के ऊपर बहुत बुरा असर पड़ेगा। इसकी वजह से वो भी स्लम एरिया में रहने की वजह से हम लोगों को बहुत तकलीफ का सामना करना पड़ता है। उसके अलावा ये कि जब हम यंग लोगों को बाहर निकलने में इतनी परेशानी हो रही है, तो हमारे घर की जो बुजुर्ग औरतें हैं उन लोगों को हम लोग सेहत के लिए मतलब कभी बीमार पड़े तो उनको दवा के लिए लेके जाने के लिए हमको बहुत परेशानी का सामना करना पड़ता है। यंग को जब निकलने नहीं दे रहे तो बुजुर्ग को किस तरह से लेके जाएं? किसी तरह से अगर क्लिनिक तक हम लोग पहुंच भी गए तो डॉक्टर जो है बगैर हाथ लगाए दवा दे रहा है, हमारी तकलीफ को समझ नहीं रहा, उसको चेकअप नहीं कर रहा, जो भी हम मुंह से बोल रहे हैं उसके बाद उसके लेवल पे वो हमको दवा दे रहा है। ये भी हम लोग को परेशानी है। घर बैठ के हम लोग, परिवार इतने बड़े हैं और घर छोटा है, उसमें हम लोगों को बहुत समझ के काम करना पड़ता है। औरतों के ऊपर ही अत्याचार क्यों होता है? क्योंकि औरतों को ही सब संभालना पड़ता है। आदमी तो सिर्फ बाहर से काम करके आके पैसा दे दिए, उसके बाद से उनकी जिम्मेदारी खत्म हो जाती है, लेकिन औरतों को देखना पड़ता है। घर में सास है, ननंद है, बेटी है, बेटा है, आदमी, हर एक को जिम्मेदारी से लेके चलना पड़ता है। औरतें बहुत से अत्याचार सहते हुए अपनी जिम्मेदारी निभाती है। और मटेरियल में तो ये कहना चाहती है कि मटेरियल रखने के लिए या हमको कहीं काम करने के लिए कुछ ऐसी एक जगह दे दें आप लोग कि जहाँ पे हम लोगों को सूरज की रोशनी भी मिले और आबोहवा भी अच्छी मिले, और हम लोग अपना सामान भी रख के बहुत ही आराम से अपने घर से मतलब टेंशन फ्री होके हम उस जगह पे बैठ के अपना काम कर सकें। मैं इतना ही कहना चाहती हूँ आप लोगों से। शुक्रिया।
Shukriya, Asyapa. I'll quickly translate what Asyapa mentioned. Asya Sheikh is the secretary for Learn Mahila Kamgar Sangathan. It is a trade union in Maharashtra, and she lives in Mumbai in Dharavi, which is one of the largest informal settlement in Asia. What she does is she's also a home-based worker apart from being secretary of Learn, and she stitches clothes. She stitches suits sitting out of her own home. She mentioned that there are many issues that they face, especially related to their home and livelihood. They have a small home and large families, so it's generally congested and crowded. Their homes don't have enough sunlight or ventilation. There are many health issues also they face because of that. In the daytime itself, they have to switch on the lights, and therefore the electricity bills are also generally quite high. There's a lot of impact that they have even on the eyes while doing the stitching work in the dim light. She talked about the fact that, they don't have enough space to keep raw material because the families are large, houses are small, and there's no space to keep the raw material. She also mentioned the fact that, she does go out, they have to go out and procure raw material, it doesn't come to their doorstep. So, which is about 1 or 2 kilometers away from home, and they don't get bus service or railway service to go there. So they either have to take a rickshaw or a taxi, which is very expensive. So they actually have to walk, and walking during summers and monsoons is very difficult, especially in monsoons, the raw material tends to get wet, and that becomes a big issue. She also touched upon the impact of the pandemic and, the lockdown in itself. And when the lockdown was implemented, the police ensured that everybody had to stay inside their own homes. However, in the slum or the informal settlement where she lives, they have shared toilets. And despite being beaten, they still have to use the toilets. And she said, if it's difficult for her, think about, the older people also. She also mentioned about the fact that, it's very difficult to take the older people to the doctors and the clinics. And even if they somehow reach the clinic, the doctors are not touching them, just by whatever they're saying, they just prescribe a medicine. She's also mentioned about the fact that men just go outside, earn, and give the money at home, while they are people who have to take care of the entire family, the extended family. And they also face violence. And she also mentioned one additional thing, that they would like to have, maybe a workspace which is very well lit, where they can put their raw material, and they can work without stress and tension. Thank you, Renana.
Thank you so much, Janhavi. And thank you also. And Asiya Ben, khas shukriya aapko. Thank you also.
Thank you.
Thank you for being in the time. I think we have 15 minutes for each sector. I just would like to draw out 1 or 2 points, which Asiya Ben said and Janhavi Ben said. How does the city treat them, and what should they be doing? So 3 points come to my mind. I'm sure there are more. One is the whole issue that the home is the workplace. And when the home does not give facilities, should we not be having workplaces near their home, like Janhavi Ben showed for Nepal and Asiya Ben asked for? A workplace near their home where they can gather together, have some lighting, and have a place to store. So workplaces. Secondly, transport. The transport that is there does not suit people who live in the slums, and it should. Why should they be ignored? And finally, and so important, the whole issue of having toilets in their home or very nearby. So these 3 things are so important, not only for home-based workers, but for people who live, all kinds of workers who live in slums. I'd now like to pass to our domestic worker sector. And Nalini, would you like to start? Nalini
Yes.
is a veteran of many movements. And of course, her biodata will be there in the chat, but still, I'd just like to say that she's also part of SEWA Kerala and SEWA Bharat, and she coordinates the domestic workers platform, National Domestic Workers Platform, and is a really vocal actress for domestic workers. Over to you, Nalini.
Thank you, Renana. And thanks to everybody, and thanks for this opportunity to share something about
Nalini ma'am,
yeah?
sorry to interrupt, but your voice is not coming fine. I guess your internet
Can you hear it
connection may
now?
be weak. Yes, we can hear now.
Is it better? Okay.
Yeah.
So the National Platform for Domestic Workers.
Sorry, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am.
Is it
It's not coming Yeah, maybe you can turn off your video if your
Okay.
connection is weak.
Uh-oh. You think it's better now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So the national platform is a platform small.
Sorry, ma'am. No. Sorry to interrupt again, ma'am. No, I guess you can remove
Shall
the
I?
earphones and remove the
Oh.
earphones and speak.
Is it better now?
Please go ahead. I'll get.
Okay, the National Platform for Domestic Workers is a platform of small and large trade unions of domestic workers. And it was started in 2013. I will tell you more about the platform and what we do together. But before that, probably I'd like Pratima Ben to share her experience as a domestic worker in the city of Delhi. And then I'd come back after her. Pratima Ben, अपना अनुभव share करेंगे, please.
There is a big problem somewhere, I think, Radhika, you got to kind of put this together. Someone's mic is open and therefore all kind of odd sounds are coming in. We're not able to hear
Sir,
her.
it's not the mic. I guess there's some trouble on Nalini ma'am's end. I'll call her and I'll figure it out.
But in that
Sorry.
case, in that case, Renana ji, can we switch her and start with someone else by the time her phone is fixed up?
But I would like Pratima Ben to speak because she has to go back to work. I'll get onto my phone maybe in the meantime.
Yeah, okay.
प्रतिमा बेन,
यस नमस्ते बहन।
नमस्ते, आप वीडियो कर दीजिए। हाँ ठीक है, बोलिए
हाँ,
प्रतिमा बेन।
नमस्ते, मेरा नाम प्रतिमा है और मैं एक डोमेस्टिक वर्कर हूँ।
बोलिए।
हाँ, काम के ऊपर बता रही, मतलब आपको जानना है कि हमें क्या क्या परिस्थितियाँ आती है, क्या क्या मुश्किल होता है, तो उसी के ऊपर बताऊंगी। जैसे कि हम कामगार हैं तो हम घर से निकल जाते हैं, काम पर जाते हैं, वो लोग टाइम से चाहिए उनको। अगर बारिश में थोड़ा सा लेट हो जाए तब भी वो डांटेंगे, दूसरे घर में जाना के लिए बोलेंगे तब भी वो डांटेंगे।
बोलते जाइए।
हाँ मैं बोलूं, क्योंकि म्यूट हो गई है।
बोलिए।
हाँ, उसके बाद हम घर से निकल जाते हैं तो सड़कों पर जब जाते हैं तो हमें रिक्शा करना पड़ता है। रिक्शे में जाओ तो पैसे की चिंता होती है, और फिर पैदल जाएं तो देर हो जाती है, फिर हेल्थ का भी ध्यान रखना पड़ता है, इसलिए रिक्शे पर जाते हैं। लेकिन हमारे लिए यही है मुश्किल कि चाहे बारिश हो चाहे गर्मी हो, हमें काम पर जाना पड़ता है। तबीयत खराब हो तब भी वो काम पर बुलाएंगे, अगर एक टाइम गलती से फोन ना करें तब भी डांटते हैं। तो ऐसी परिस्थितियां हैं, और हमारे लिए मुश्किल ये है कि हमारी बात को सुनते नहीं, समझते भी नहीं है। दूसरी बात यह है कि तबीयत वगैरह खराब हो, कुछ बोल रहे हैं तो उनका कहना है कि तबीयत खराब हो गया तो हम क्या करें, तुम्हारी तो ड्यूटी है, तुम्हें तो आना ही है। वो नहीं समझ रहे कि तबीयत खराब है तो चलो भाई एक दिन की छुट्टी दे दे, नहीं। और दूसरी बात यह है कि जब तबीयत खराब हो जाए, अगर हमारी 2 से ज्यादा छुट्टी हो जाती है तो वो पैसे काट लेते हैं, हमारी महीने की जो पैसे होती है उसमें से वो काट लेती हैं। बोलती हैं कि अगर तुमने 2 से ज्यादा छुट्टी करे हो इसलिए तीनों छुट्टी के पैसे कटेंगे, या 4 छुट्टी हुआ तो चारों का कटेगा, तो उस हिसाब से काट के देते हैं। उन लोगों को ये नहीं समझ में आता है कि चलो बीमार है तो छुट्टी दें, नहीं, उनकी अपनी ही बात रखनी होती है। ठीक है। और मुश्किल ये है कि हमारी काम की कोई मतलब वो नहीं है, महत्व नहीं है कि हमारी वजह से वो चल रहे हैं, या मतलब कि चलो काम कर रही है तो उसको सैलरी दे रहे, ऐसा उनको कुछ सोचना नहीं है। उनका कहना है कि तबीयत खराब हो, धूप हो, बारिश हो, तुम्हें काम पर आना ही है। और हम लोग अगर कभी बोलते हैं कि थोड़ी सी पैसे बढ़ा दो क्योंकि बाकी घरों में बढ़ गया है, तो पैसे नहीं बढ़ाते हैं, बोलते हैं हम तो इतना ही देंगे, इतने में करना है तो करो, नहीं तो हम दूसरे बहन को बुलाएंगे। हालांकि दूसरी बहन की बहुत मजबूरी होती है, इसलिए वो कम में चली जाती है। लेकिन हम लोग समझाते हैं बहनों की ऐसा मत करो, लेकिन वो बोलती है कि बहन मजबूरी के कारण हमें कम में ही करना पड़ता है। लेकिन उन लोगों को ये लगता है कि चलो इसको छोड़ा के अगर हमें कम में मिलती है तो हमें कम में भी मिल जाए, और हमारी काम की कोई कीमत नहीं है कि ये लगी है तो इसी को रखें, उनका ये मानना नहीं है। उनका लगता है कि चलो ये 2 से ज़्यादा छुट्टी करी तो इसको हटा भी देना है। काम का वो नहीं है कि हाँ इसी को रखना है, 4 से ज़्यादा छुट्टी हो गया, चलो आएगी इसको रख लेते हैं पैसा काट के, ऐसा भी नहीं है। कई कई घरों में हमको हटा के, अगर हमारी 4 छुट्टी हो गई, हमको हटा के किसी और को रखते हैं ताकि वो छुट्टी ना करें। और हालांकि ऐसा होता भी है, कई बहनें बीमार में बुखार में तड़प रही है तब भी जाती हैं, क्योंकि उनको लगता है कि काम छूट जाएगा। ये सब मुद्दा है। और कुछ बोलना है? अभी तो
आप
खैर बहुत
कितना
सारा
घर
है।
में काम करते हैं बहन? कितना घर में काम करते हैं आप?
अभी तो हम लॉकडाउन से पहले बहुत जैसे 5-6 घरों में काम करते थे, और अभी लॉकडाउन में तो बिल्कुल बंद था। लेकिन लॉकडाउन के बाद अभी भी हमें बुला रहे हैं, तो अगर एक घर बुला रहे हैं तो दूसरे घर जाने के लिए मना कर रहे हैं। उनका कहना ये है कि अगर आप रास्ते से आ रहे हो तो कहीं पर छूना नहीं, गाड़ी में बैठना नहीं, चल के आना है। और पूरी हम जब सोसाइटी के अंदर एंटर होते हैं तो पूरी बॉडी पर हमारी सैनिटाइजर होती है, जिससे कि हमें खुजली होती है, और मतलब कहीं पर जलने लगता है, क्योंकि रोज होना दोनों टाइम सैनिटाइजर लेना मतलब बहुत होता है, स्मेल।
ओके बहन।
हाँ, और भी
Okay. Okay. No, so I think I'll just sum up a little bit about what Pratima Ben said. Can you hear me now? Is it clear?
Yes.
Yeah. So Pratima Ben is a domestic worker, and she actually earlier worked in 6 houses on a particular day, which means she worked an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. And she says now that after COVID, of course, people are more wary about them coming from outside, and many people have stopped domestic workers. So she doesn't have that much of work. The issues she spoke about was that, she's supposed to reach the home on time. And if she doesn't, then the employer gets very angry. And to reach on time, sometimes she also has to take an auto, which means spending more money. So there's this huge issue about reaching on time, about not getting a day off when one is sick. And if one does get a day off, take a day off, her salary will be cut if it's more than 2 offs in a week. And that, of course, these 2 offs, one must know that domestic workers have been getting only since a couple of years after they began to organize for a day off from work. But they get 2 offs a month in some areas and not all. And then she says the treatment that they get while they work is also very inhuman, because the employers don't understand that they too are human beings. And the other big issue they face is the competition between workers themselves, because there is no fixed wage. And because there is no fixed wage, they're at the mercy of the employers who settle on wages. And they're threatened by employers that they will be changed from their employment if they don't, because there are so many others demanding work. So I think she's summed up part of her experiences. And I will like to take that a little bit ahead, because Pratima Ben, of course, is a part-time, which, she works full-time, but she works part-time in different people's homes. And she's one kind of worker. There are workers who work the full day in a particular home, and there are workers who also live in with their employers, who face a whole series of other issues. From the city point of view, I think there are several things that one would like to mention here. So there is a relational issue that the workers face with their employers. This way, the way that they are treated by employers, they're very needed, but they're not respected. And I think this is something that in our Indian society, which is very, very intense, that people are not treated well. And many of the workers, for instance, have to get into these gated communities, where there are security guards at the entrance, and they have to have their ID cards in order to go in. So they're seen more like a security risk. And in some places also, they have to register with the police as if they are criminals. So although the movements have been fighting this, all our unions have resisted this, that we say, why should a domestic worker register when nobody else registers with the police, no other worker? Then, of course, when they are in these gated, working in flats and sometimes for longer hours, they are not allowed to use the toilets in the homes, and there are no common toilets in many of these areas. So this is a huge issue for workers. And, we know that many workers from morning to noon or even little later are not going to the toilet, which means that they don't drink water. And because they don't drink water, they have other kinds of issues. When the workers did organize for wage parity in a particular building, for instance, a residential block, it was the resident worker, the welfare associations, which organized against them. And the resident welfare associations then put up other wage charts in their buildings, which were much lower than the workers were asking for. So this kind of relation between employers and workers is something that we really need to change. Then, of course, as a worker who has basic needs, like housing, which, as she says, sometimes is very far away from where they work. And then for migrants who come to the city, we all know that for migrants who move to the urban areas, domestic work is one of the sectors in which many women find work. But then they're at the mercy of these tekadars who rent them rooms or space, which at very exploitative rates. They have absolutely no childcare or health benefits in the areas where they live. And the schooling for their children is also very minimal if they cannot afford to pay fees for their children. So working class areas don't have these infrastructure facilities that women would require in order to live a decent life. Then she has issues of her own security. When many of them go home from work in the evenings, for instance, when it's dark, many of them complain about issues of, being teased on the roads. They have to pass areas which are not properly lit, and you have men gambling at different corners. Of course, fortunately for domestic workers, they have been included in the Act on Sexual Harassment at the Workplace. So domestic workers, if harassed at their workplace, which is the home, of course, have some possibility to go to complain and get relief. But being informal workers, of course, and the home being an informal workplace, the ability to get relief is through the local complaints committees, which often don't function. So this is another big issue for domestic workers in the cities. Then for somebody like Pratima Ben, who works in several houses, if she has her workplace close to her home, she's able to go home in between, probably during her lunch break. But there are many domestic workers who hang out in maybe a park or somewhere at the noon break before they go for their afternoon shift. Now, as these spaces also get reduced in urban areas, these common spaces where people can gather, as they get reduced, these workers also don't have this reprieve, space to have their meal, to rest during their work hours. So this is another big issue in the city. Then, we also know that, as Renana Ben has said in the beginning, how these informal workers contribute to the GDP of the country. They have very few benefits. So domestic workers are not, and especially with these new codes which have come now, they have been completely neglected. In fact, even specifically left out, named in the Occupational Health and Safety Code, that the code does not cover them. So I think these are very sad issues, and especially with the fact that domestic workers have been organizing for so long, have begun to have a voice, but then you have this backlash from the government, which excludes them completely. I'll stop with this at that point. Thank you, Renana Ben.
Thank you, Nalini Ben, and thank you, Pratima Ben. आप बहुत अच्छा बोली.
थैंक यू आपको भी सुनने के लिए.
I just want to point one thing out of what Nalini Ben said, so many things, but all of us who are on this, listening to this webinar or on this webinar, all of us do employ domestic workers, and so many of the middle class. So I think the issue here is, what is the relation between the middle class and the informal workers? And should we not be thinking of that as part of the city's, how to develop a city well, where it's not just an employer-employee relationship, it is a whole class relationship. And the classes really do need to live together rather than be exploitative of one another. I'll now pass to talking about exploitation, and a really exploited sector, which is the street vendors who face physical violence a lot. And I will ask Manali Ben to take over. Manali Ben is the national coordinator of SEWA and has been many years fighting for street vendors, of course, for other informal workers, but for street vendors, both in Ahmedabad, many places in Ahmedabad, but also at the national level. She was very influential in getting the Street Vendors Act. So her CV, of course, will be up in the chat, so you can see more about her. And over to you, Manali Ben. Manali Ben, we can't hear you. Radhika?
Yes, ma'am. Manali, ma'am, we cannot hear you. Ma'am, you are on mute right now.
You're muted, Manali Ben.
We cannot hear you, ma'am. We cannot hear you at all.
Do you think it's worth Manali Ben going away and coming back?
Yeah, Renana ma'am, please continue with the other speaker. I'll figure it out with Manali ma'am.
So talking about exploitation, let's go to the waste pickers. And Lakshmi Narayan. Lakshmi Narayan is with Surekha Ben, both from Pune. And Lakshmi, ever since I've known her for Lakshmi many decades, has been an active fighter for waste collectors, both in Pune as well as at the national level. So over to you. Will you speak first or will Surekha Ben speak first? Okay, please go ahead. Surekha Ben, आप बोलिए.
सर्वांना माझा नमस्कार. माझं नाव सुरेखा गायकवाड. कागद काच पत्रा कष्टकरी पंचायतचे मी सभासद आहे. स्वच्छ प्लसच्या अध्यक्ष आहे आणि दारोदार कचरा गोळा करण्याचे काम मी करते. आणि 1993 च्या अगोदरची आमची परिस्थिती इतकी बिकट, म्हणजे इतकी हे होतं ना कठीण, की सर्वांचा आम्हाला त्रास असायचा. माणसापासून वॉचमॅन, पोलीस आणि कुत्र्यांचा सुद्धा. का तर आम्हाला कचऱ्या कुंडीत उतरून तो कचरा काढायला लागायचा. आणि लोक पण व्यवस्थित हे करत नव्हते, का तर आमची साडी भरलेली असायची. त्या कुंडीत उतरणं, कागद काच काढणं, पत्रा काढणं, भंगार काढणं. आणि अचानक सिक्युरिटी येऊन चोरीचे आरोप घालायचे, की ही तर तुम्ही हे होतं, बादली होती, लोकांचे कपडे होते, ते चोरले म्हणून डायरेक्ट पोलीस स्टेशन मध्येच घेऊन जायचे. आणि असायचं काय आमच्या पोत्यात, तर कागद, कुठं बाटल्या दारूच्या, कुठं एखादं प्लॅस्टिक, हे उष्टा असं असायचं. पण चोरीचे आरोप आणि ते पोतं पाष्टी घेऊन कुत्रे मागं लागायचे. मग संघटनेने संघटना आली तेव्हा संघटनेला असं वाटलं की बाबा ह्यांच्यापाशी काहीतरी एक हे असाय पाहिजे, आयडेंटिटी पुरावा, म्हणजे काहीतरी की यांना लोकांनी त्रास नाही दिला पाहिजे, पोलिसांनी त्रास नाही दिला पाहिजे, वॉचमॅननी त्रास नाही दिला पाहिजे. मग त्यांनी आम्हाला लाल फोटो पास दिला संघटनेने की बाबा तुमच्याकडे एक ओळखपत्र कॉर्पोरेशन कडून की हे कचरा कमी करतात, चोऱ्या करत नाही, पण तुमचाच कचरा कमी करतात, कागद काढतात, पत्रा काढतात आणि तुमचाच. मग तशी आम्हाला ओळख भेटून मग थोडी परिस्थिती आमची सुधारली. लोक काय करायला लागले की बाबा कुंडीत उतरतात बाया, कुंडीत नको कचरा टाकाय, जे घ्यायचा कागद हे आहेत ते बाहेर आपण टाकावे. मग असं प्रगती होत होत गेल्यानंतर स्वच्छ आलं. स्वच्छ की बाबा इतका कमी कचरा करतात आपला, की असं संघटनेने दाखवून दिलं की आमचे लोक इतका कमी कचरा करतात, तुमच्या गाड्यांचं हे ते. म्हणून एक दारोदार कचरा गोळा करण्याचे काम सुरू झाले. मग त्यातनं आम्ही एक प्रोफेशनलपणा आला आमच्या अंगात की गाडी, गणवेश, बकेट्स आणि बरोबर व्यवस्थितपणा, की माणसाचा बघण्याचा दृष्टिकोन बदलला. कुत्रे पहिल्याच्या सारखे महाग लागत नाहीत का, तर ते बघतात की व्यवस्थित आहेत, गाडी बरोबर चालत जसं ड्युटीला. म्हणजे असं आमच्यात प्रगती झाली संघटनेमुळं. आणि इथून पुढं पण आता सगळं होत चाललंय, फक्त आम्हाला एवढी अडचण आहे की आम्हाला जागा नाही. कचरा घेतो आम्ही तर वेळेवर गाडी नाही आली तर आम्हाला शॉर्टिंग शेड नाहीत मॅडम. एखादं शॉर्टिंग शेड दिलं तर आमचा बाबा कचरा त्याच्यामध्ये बसू शकतो. हा, आणि डुकरं कुत्रे गाड्या तसेच लावून घरी तरी बसतो उशीरपर्यंत गाडीची वाट बघत, आणि गाडी नाही आली की मग तसंच ठेवून गेलो ना, मग डुकरं वस्तीत असतात झोपडपट्टीमध्ये. झोपडपट्टीचा कचरा गोळा करताना तर खूप हाल होतात आमचे. का तर गाडी वेळेवर नाही आली तर मग तिथं सोसायटीवाले सुद्धा गाडीला आतमध्ये जागा देत नाहीत, नाही लावायची गाडी म्हणतात, वास येतो आम्हाला. मग असं आम्ही कुठं साईडला लावली तर कुत्रे डुकर सगळं ते पसरवतात. मग उद्या सकाळी येऊन ते भरायचं आणि तेच लोक मग कंप्लेंट करतात, बघा कचरा इथं कसा काय काम करतात लोक काय नाही. पण आम्हाला असं म्हणजे समजून घेत नाहीत की बाबा हा कचरा कशामुळं सांडला असेल, गाडी नाही आली, ह्यांना जागा नाही, तुम्ही जागा द्या ना. शेड दिलं तर तुम्हाला एक कागद सुद्धा बाहेर दिसणार नाही, व्यवस्थित राहील ना कचरा. म्हणून आम्हाला जागा हवी, म्हणजे अजून आमचं स्वच्छ म्हणजे दिसल पुणे. जागा दिली ना कुठंच कचरा दिसणार नाही जाता येता.
Okay, she says, my name is Surekha Gaikwad and I've been working in the city collecting waste since 1993. In the early days when I used to go around and collect waste, I used to be harassed by not only different kinds of citizens, including police, municipal officials, and citizens, general citizens, but also had to fight with dogs and pigs to collect waste. I had to get into the bins and collect the waste myself, fight with animals, get hurt and cut in the process. And after doing all that, very easily the cops used to accuse us of theft. We used to be held responsible for any kind of theft that happened in the locality. Very often they would take us to the police station and find that there was nothing in our bags except paper or alcohol bottles or some old clothes or something like that. And they would typically turn around and say that you must be responsible for the thefts in the area. As we got organized, the first demand that we made was that the municipality give us identity cards so that we have some kind of recognition that establishes that we are not thieves. What work we are doing is legitimate and helps the city. We also made a lot of arguments to say that we actually reduce the city's waste and we are helping organize it. And therefore, the municipality should recognize us and integrate us in doorstep collection. After this happened, people started treating us with a little more respect, and we were not accused so much by the cops and others. However, the bigger step that we needed to make was for the municipality to integrate us in waste collection. After SWaCH was formed, after all the arguments were made for reduction of waste and so on, we started working much more professionally. We are now integrated in doorstep collection of waste. We go around house to house. We dress with uniforms. We have buckets. We have push cards that help us go around to collect waste. And obviously, people have been forced to change their attitude towards us. They look at us as someone who's providing a service, who's doing a duty. They don't look at us as scavengers, which is how we used to be looked at earlier. So definitely organizing and establishing to the municipality that the work we do is important and that it reduces the municipal costs and it keeps the city clean has made a difference. There's, however, a long way to go even now. Even today, one of our biggest demands, which has not been met, is we do not have access to spaces to segregate waste. A lot of citizens neither give us space in the societies to segregate waste. The municipality does not give us spaces to segregate waste. And if municipal vehicles don't come in on time for secondary waste collection, the waste lies around and people think we are responsible for it. It's not our waste. They should recognize that the waste is coming from their houses. And unless the municipality creates the spaces for us to sort and maintain this waste systematically, the city is going to look dirty. If they organize and give spaces for waste to be handled in a decentralized manner and for waste workers to work out of it, we will manage that to make the city look much cleaner than it does. So this is broadly what she says. I'll just continue a little bit into the broad situation of waste pickers overall. Like Surekha said, a lot of waste pickers in most cities in India are often criminalized. It's not only in India. The situation of waste pickers globally has been mapped and studied by waste picker organizations across countries. The prevalence of waste picking is much more in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, because these are relatively developing economies and the waste management systems have not been so mechanized. Organizations across the world working with waste pickers have tried to argue that actually decentralized systems for waste management, which integrate waste pickers, which give them a foothold in the system, might be much better for our economies, for the workers, for the cities, and for the citizens than centralized collection systems as Western countries have developed, and that these are the ways that our economies can be sustained, made stronger, and that waste pickers can get dignity that doesn't typically happen in other places. There is a huge issue with the attitude of different kinds of citizens towards waste pickers. Like I said, police harass them because there is no way for them to establish that the waste that they are collecting should belong to them. In some cities, the right to access to waste has been established, and cities recognize that the waste pickers who are recognized by the municipality should have the primary rights over the recyclables that they collect. Unfortunately, this is true for less than 11 cities across the world. In most other cities, even the waste that they collect, even though they are reducing around 20 to 25% of the overall waste that is being generated in the city, they are still looked at as illegal criminal workers who should not be accessing the waste. Unfortunately, in many cities, waste collection systems have displaced waste pickers instead of integrating them. Contract systems are in place. And in contract systems, contractors and municipalities prefer to hire males. Females are displaced. As it is demographically, waste pickers are largely women, they're largely Dalit, and they're of course from very poor families. Unfortunately, even though they are marginalized on all these counts, as cities so-called improve their waste management systems, they tend to take in more males. They tend to take in males because it's easier to hire them on contracts, to give them a daily wage, because men prefer to work with a daily wage, whereas a woman would obviously appreciate getting the money at the end of a month so that she can sustain her family more systematically with it. Waste pickers have been established in most cities as significantly contributing to climate change reduction, because they are mitigating climate change by diverting large quantities of waste from the landfill. Nonetheless, waste collection systems are getting more and more closer to centralized waste to energy kind of technologies, which end up burning the waste and don't give waste pickers any access to it. Now, a lot of waste pickers have argued across the world that waste picking in labor intensive economies is much better because it ensures that every last piece of paper and plastic is diverted from the landfill instead of increasing the mechanized collection of waste. Low-cost models, which are pushcart based, do not have a very large environmental footprint, are much better for our cities in multiple ways. They also allow for more inclusive kind of practices. In many places where waste pickers are employed by citizens for doorstep collection of waste, they develop a bond with the citizens recognize them just like they do domestic workers. Of course, like Renana Bain and Pratima Bain pointed out, being recognized by a citizen doesn't necessarily mean that they're treated well, but it definitely makes a difference, and more engagement with the middle class certainly makes a difference in the middle class attitude towards it. I'm not claiming that the city changes immediately, but a lot of positive change and inclusion happens simply due to more interaction, and allowing for these platforms and spaces that create more interaction between the middle class and the urban poor, who were so far invisible, unrecognized, and probably treated like the waste that they were collecting, makes a big difference in the cities and the citizens' attitudes towards them. Today in Pune, it's slightly difficult for the municipality to completely displace waste, because the SWaCH model as it is may or may not continue. But the city representatives, the municipality, the elected representatives will find it very difficult to wish away a waste picker completely. So even if they change the model, the waste picker will be protected. And this happens due to, of course, the large efforts of organizing. And currently in India itself, there are around 35 organizations of waste pickers. Around 40,000 of our country's 1.5 million waste pickers are part of some organization or the other. Of course, the numbers are much bigger. Like I said, less than 50% of the waste pickers of India are organized, and being organized, unfortunately, has not necessarily meant that they have access to various benefits. Our demands are various, and across this country depends on the city where waste pickers come from, because depending on the levels of integration that they have managed for themselves, the city looks at them differently. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just picking up one or two themes. In a way, we keep coming back to the respect and dignity, the need for respect and dignity, and what happens when you're not treated with respect and dignity. The need for space, public space, is the need for using public space, and for planning, which we discussed yesterday, for planning to plan these spaces so that workers or informal economy can be more productive, perform better. I especially liked your point, and I think this happens everywhere, that when new centralized systems come in, when government takes over the system, the women get replaced by men. And that is something that we all try to prevent. But I think our patriarchal society is such that as soon as it mechanizes, the women are gone and the men take over, which is very sad. I think many of those themes, again, will be repeated in the case of the street vendors, the issue of space, the issue of dignity, respect, and where are female vendors. And so I'll again invite Manali Ben. Manali Ben, can you come on?
Yeah, thank you, Renana. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So thank you once again for inviting us to speak in this webinar. And as Renana mentioned, the subject street vendors and cities is very close to SEWA's heart and my heart. So we are working in 18 states since 1972. So today I will be sharing my experience that has made us struggle, fight, cry, and celebrate. So talking about the street vendors, they constitute 2 to 2.5% of the city's population. So roughly there are around 33 million street vendors in our country. So now how did the street vendors origin? The evidence shows that the markets are evolved organically over a period of time, which we call them natural markets. Many of the natural markets of India are heritage markets and are existence because of the demand and supply. So it is not only a source of self-employment to the poor, but also provides affordable as well as convenient services to urban population. In India, employment generation is a challenge. And here whole families are involved in street vending and creating employment. Many other livelihoods are dependent on natural markets like light providers, bag providers, head loaders, stamp posts, food providers, and even the doorstep banking. Thus, it has become a major industry in the informal sector, but it is remain invisible, though their contribution to GDP and our national income is enormous. Therefore, it is essential to strengthen and develop the natural markets of the street vendors. But sadly, the situation of vendors has not changed after so many years. The smart cities do not have the place for them. They are beaten, evicted, harassed, and their goods are confiscated by the police and municipal authorities. Current COVID situation has made the situation worse. The street vendors are losing their livelihood. Nearly 98% of street vendors have incurred debts at the high rates of interest of 3%. One of our vegetable vendor, Reva Ben, said, we would not die of COVID, but we will definitely die of hunger. Government has issued COVID SOP guidelines for all businesses. Gyms are open, malls are open, but has not issued COVID SOP guidelines for the natural markets of the street vendors. Moreover, it is clearly came out from the COVID crisis is that the street vendors have no social protection. SEWA's own social protection like Vimo SEWA, insurance, that is insurance. SEWA Bank covers our vendor members by providing insurance, healthcare, savings, and credit. Childcare centers are also essential for the vendors members in the natural markets. We're going to start it. So the reason is that the policymakers, citizens, and government does not acknowledge their coexistence, and the policies are not framed keeping the natural markets, tradition, and culture in mind, but is simply imported from the developed cities like Tokyo or Hong Kong. The middle class residents, though they want to buy fruits and vegetables from the vendors, but they do not want vendors in the locality or surroundings. The SEWA struggle for 2 baskets worth of space in our city started from Manekchuk, that is a natural market in Ahmedabad, and led to Vijay Chowk in Delhi. So talking some ups and downs of our vendor struggle. In year 1981, SEWA filed a case in the Supreme Court for right to vend. In 1984, for the first time, our founder Ela Ben introduced a resolution for the statutory policy that recommended a bill on the status of street vendors in the parliament. Further, in 2001, SEWA with the Ministry of Urban Development organized all stakeholders workshop where minister announced the formation of task force of 3 persons to formulate the national policy for street vendors. SEWA was one of it. As a result, national policy for street vendors was enacted in 2004. We demanded Central Act for the street vendors in 2010, and we made a draft of it. We made a presentation before the Parliamentary Standing Committee regarding inclusion of important provisions in 2012, and same was approved by the group of ministers. The Street Vending Protection and Livelihood and Regulation of Street Vending Bill 2014 was approved by House of Commons. As the same was unanimously passed by both the houses in 2014 due to SEWA's initiatives and after hunger strike and lot of negotiation advocacy in the parliament. So it's a long struggle of 40 years. But one thing we learn from our dealing that the street vendors are not priority with the government. We also experience that only talking up the issues and problems does not work. We need to provide solution to them. So I would like to just share with you one example of Bhadra Natural Heritage Market of my city. So this market is situated in the middle of the city and hosts Bhadra Fort and famous temple of goddess Bhadrakali. More than 576 street vendors members of SEWA on their livelihood from the vending in this natural market. In 2010, our corporation undertook development work and assured that vendors shall not be evicted. But in November 2014, announced draw to allot the vending places. That means that the vendors selling footwear will get vending place near temple and vendors selling worship items far away. We had no alternative but filed the court case and stay order was granted. But now struggle was how to include the street vendors in the development plan. The vendors only know what is best for them. So they sat with the architect and made a schematic plan in participatory process with the corporation. The real problem arose while allocating the vending spaces to the vendors. We knew that some places were encroached by antisocial elements. There also we fought to remove them. The whole process was most important in developing the trust between us and corporation and police. We gave them identity cards and corporation approved it. And based on our identity cards, corporation also issue identity card. The whole process was possible only because of the strong leaders and the Street Vendors National Market Committee formed in Badra. Now they have registered as their own association and our role remains just a facilitator. So in our country, the vendors and the public at large were were always in coexistence. Whenever we go out, we see riots of colors, street vendors wearing colorful ethnic clothes and selling beautiful products rich in colors and fragrance ranging from fruits, vegetables, bangles, bags, and whatnot. So moreover, we find variety of vendors in pushcart, ringing bells, vendors on spreadsheet, vendors vending outside their houses in slums, making our cities attractive. Now we have to decide what we want. We want cars and vehicles rushing by making pollution, blowing horns, which increase carbon footprints. So I will stop here and I will just request my colleague, Jignasa Ben. She is a leader, vendor leader, and she's the second generation in SEWA. So Jignasa Ben, tame bolsho? And I request Janhavi Ben to translate. Thank you.
नमस्ते, मैं स्ट्रीट वेंडर हूँ। मेरा नाम जिज्ञासा है और मैं सेवा की दूसरी पीढ़ी हूँ। मैं अपनी माँ की उंगली पकड़ के मैं सेवा में आई हूँ और मैंने वेंडर बचपन से ही सेवा को देखा है और वेंडर्स का संघर्ष भी देखा है। और मैं अपने प्रश्न की बात करूँ तो वेंडर्स की जिंदगी संघर्ष है। तो देखने जाए तो एक तो पुलिस मारती है, पुलिस वाले आके मारते हैं, और दूसरा के नगर निगम वाले आते हैं तो वो सारा सामान ले जाते हैं। मैं छोटी थी तब मैंने देखा है कि अगर पुलिस वाले मेरी माँ को मारते हैं तो हमें उन्हें अस्पताल ले जाना पड़ता है। और अगर नगर निगम वाले आके हमारा माल सामान ले जाते हैं तो उस दिन हमारे घर में चूल्हा नहीं जलता था, क्योंकि माल सामान लाने के लिए सारा पैसा तो माल सामान लाने में लगा दिया और वही माल सामान नगर निगम वाले ले जाते थे। और मैंने बहुत संघर्ष हमने जीवन में देखा है। और जब मैं बात करूं तो हम सेवा में जुड़े कि हम वेंडर्स को हक मिले और उनके लिए कुछ कानून बने। तो मैं दिल्ली गई, वहां हमने धरना किया। सेवा के साथ मैं दिल्ली गई थी, वहां हमने धरना किया, भूख हड़ताल की और सब संसद से मिलके हमने सबको वेंडर्स की यानी कि हमारी खुद की बात उन्हें बताई, हमारे जो संघर्ष है उनको समझाए। तो जब पार्लियामेंट में हमारे लिए जो कानून पसार हो रहा था तब हम वहीं थे और हम गैलरी में बैठे। हमने देखा कि जब हमने सांसद को सबको हमने हमारे संघर्ष के बारे में बात की तो वही संघर्ष उनको दिखाई दिया और जब हमारे लिए कानून बना तो सब सांसद हमारी एक हो गए और हमारे लिए कानून पसार हुआ। तब मुझे वो मेरे लिए जीवन की सबसे बड़ी खुशी की बात थी जब कानून बना। और मैंने सोचा कि मन में कि हाश अब हमारी परेशानी कम हो गई और हमारी आने वाली पीढ़ी अपना उनको परेशानी नहीं होगी और वो अपने लिए अपना रोजगार सही से कर सकेंगे। लेकिन अभी भी मन में एक प्रश्न है, क्या ये शहर हमारे वेंडर्स के लिए नहीं है? क्या हमारे लिए यहाँ जगह कहीं नहीं है? और जो सेवा सोचती है, सेवा करती है, तो क्या वो सरकार नहीं सोच सकती, सरकार नहीं कर सकती? बस इतना ही कहना चाहूंगी। धन्यवाद।
All right. Jignasa Pen said namaste. And her name is Jignasa Parmar. She's a street vendor. She's a second generation leader at SEWA. She in fact mentioned that she used to hold her mother's hand and come to SEWA. So she's seen the struggle of street vendors and of the union since her childhood. She talked about the fact that street vendors face a lot of violence from the police as well as the municipal corporation. She mentioned that when the police comes to the market, they had to take her mother to the hospital, and while the municipal corporation would come to the market, there would be no food cooked at home. She also mentioned about the struggle for the policy that they worked for street vendors, and the fact that she went all the way to Delhi and they conducted a hunger strike. They also informed the policymakers about the needs and the struggles of street vendors. She mentioned about the fact that when the policy and the laws were being passed, they sat in the gallery in the parliament, and the policymakers could see the struggle that they went through. When the policy was passed, she said she was the happiest. She felt that they'd achieved something, and the next generation would be able to work in a lot of peace. However, there's still a lot of struggles that are pending. She just has one question in her mind, which is that is there no space in the city for street vendors? And she also mentioned that if SEWA could think about the needs of street vendors, can't the municipal corporation and the policymakers, can't they think about it? Thank you.
Thank you, Janhavi Ben, and thank you to Manali Ben, and thank you Jignasa Ben. आप बहुत अच्छा बोली और हिंदी में बोली. I actually want to go back to Lakshmi, and Manali Ben did one thing that I think Lakshmi Ben, if you could also do, which is she spoke about a success that organizing did have and how it had it in the Bhadrakali market. So I'm sure, I know that for all our work, it is 3 steps forward and 2 steps backward, but still that 1 step forward, if we can speak about that, and if you could give one, maybe even one hope to us by telling us something positive or what you have done, both of you together, so Dekhaben yourself, what you have done to change things, and not on a general, but a specific example. But I also will now at this stage begin to add some of the questions. So a lot of questions for you relating to caste that you mentioned, and it's true also, waste pickers are usually from a particular caste. The question is that, there are a number of questions. One is that, does organizing help to break the caste barrier? Another question is that what we have done in this case is upgrade the waste pickers, but they still remain within the same sanitation area. Can they break out of that sanitation area and go elsewhere? So I think a number of things relating to caste, because in our societies, caste and occupation often are very closely linked. And one more question is, you in passing said SWaCH may not exist. What did you mean? And what will happen if SWaCH doesn't exist? So one good story and some of these issues. Also, if you had mentioned some policy issues, if you want to say a bit more on the policy front.
So maybe I should start with the one positive experience. There, of course, in so many decades of working with waste pickers and waste pickers organizing, there have been many positive and many negative experiences. And they differ because some smaller efforts or change sometimes lead to big changes, but some changes are so inspiring for all of us as individuals that I'm going to speak about one of these. So I remember 25 years ago when we used to actually organize the waste pickers and went around waste picking ourselves. I used to carry a black sack and go around to conduct classes and meetings with the waste pickers. And a lot of waste picking mothers waste pickers used to come forward and tell their daughters, don't go there because she'll put you in her sack and take you away. And I know that many of us had exactly the same fears when we were kids. I remember very clearly my grandmother telling me when I was a kid that don't go out. So in Tamil, waste pickers are called purkis. And in fact, interestingly, in many languages, the word for waste picker in Marathi, they used to be called utslia, which is purki is someone who's a lifter. So effectively, the connotation of the word itself is that she's a picker or a thief. And the fear is sometimes mutual. I mean, of course, as a community, as a sector, as an occupation, it is definitely looked down on, it's derogatory, and they face a lot of police harassment. But some of the issues that arise are just interpersonal relationship, just the fact of less engagement between communities. And this was something that came out very strongly. So the issue of police harassment and looking at how the police look at waste pickers has bothered waste pickers across countries for the longest time. In Pune, it was very easy for me to climb up on a stage and address waste pickers and say that no cop will stop me and ask me what is in my sack. Even if I've just dropped into someone's house and stolen something and put it in my pocket, no cop is going to dare stop me and tell me, show me what is in your bag. But why are they doing it so easily with a waste picker? Why are we not resisting it? So it's easier to say something like this. It's easier for a middle class activist to say it. But for us, a very inspiring experience that happened around 15 years ago was when Chitra Vaishirsagar, who lives in Karve Road, has come for many meetings and has heard all of us raise these issues. And she was stopped by a cop on Karve Road and asked to empty her sack. She emptied her sack and there was paper, cardboard, not even a small scrap of metal. And the policeman said, okay, kai nahi hai, bharun ge. There's nothing, so you can fill up your sack and go. And she said, why should I? You made me empty my sack. You haven't found a shred of evidence. You haven't found anything. You fill my sack for me. And in a very busy street, he had to actually put his hands in the waste and fill it. Now, it's very easy for us to say this, but for a waste picker who's meeting the same cop day after day to stand up to him and say this, it comes from a position of extreme marginalization and a little bit of, I couldn't care less. I mean, what is the worst that's going to happen? I'm already marginalized on every count. I'm fighting for everything. Let's see what he does if I make him do this. And she stretched the system. Not only did he do it, but we also we made a big deal about it. We put it in the press. We shared it with all the other waste pickers. And it made a big difference to the way police started looking at waste pickers. So that definitely made a very big difference. And it was very inspiring for all of us as activists, as well as for the waste pickers of Pune. 2-3 questions that came up. One is about caste. Yes, there's a very strong linkage, particularly with this occupation and caste, to the extent that waste pickers who might want to actually enter other professions like domestic work, around 25 years ago, that was not possible. Many of them took to waste picking because they could not get work as domestic workers, because upper class, middle class, and upper caste and middle caste families did not want Dalits to come into their house and do cooking. They didn't want to come into their house and touch vessels. The situation definitely has changed. It's not only changed across, obviously I'm not going to say that it's only changed due to organizing. There have been overall efforts across the country. There have been strong movements due to which some of this perspective has definitely changed. The there are many issues that come up when one is looking at the same caste or the same community continuing the same work. A lot of activists, including political groups, very clearly the Republican Party of India for many years has raised this question and asked why KKP-KP is encouraging waste pickers to do the same work. The argument waste pickers have given is we didn't really choose this work. We had no choice, and that's why we got into it. And having got into it, we don't have any choice but to organize and make the work conditions better. So as political parties, as individuals, as well-meaning people who really want to break out of the caste system, what are the solutions you have to offer to us? Are you giving us other upgrading opportunities? If you don't, then allow us to continue the work. Not only that, but a lot of them will argue that waste pickers who belong to certain communities have right of refusal to to work within integration. So KKP-KP has a fairly strong board which comprises entirely waste pickers who will argue that no new member should get into SWaCH unless she's actually done waste picking, and a waste picker necessarily from a certain caste should be given the first choice of work. So it is often seen as perpetuating a certain caste system, but obviously it's a choice, it's agency of the worker who's deciding this. There's also, of course, very slight heartening news or trends where when work conditions improve, you do see other castes coming in. We have a fairly elaborate database where we try to capture the caste background, the demographics of our members. And definitely with conditions of work improving, just like males come in, so do people from middle class. Middle castes, certainly not upper castes, but certain middle castes have started entering the sector when there has been more dignity, more empowerment, more service-based kind of work. And unfortunately, a waste picker from a Dalit community is going to actually oppose that, even though she might recognize that caste intersection for a sector is actually healthy. She also needs to protect her own work. So most likely she is going to say that we would want this work to be preserved first for people from a particular community if they want to continue in it. The other question was about upgradation of work conditions. So we strongly believe that waste picking in the manner in which one sees it, where waste pickers are going around with sacks and rakes and collecting from the curbsides, from containers, from landfill sites with virtually no protective gear, fighting with dogs, pigs, actually putting their hands and legs in the bare waste and collecting, it definitely goes against human sensitivity. We are certainly not promoting that waste pickers continue that way. However, we recognize that waste pickers across the globe may not have their foot into solid waste management systems, so they may not be able to argue for something better, and definitely just displacing them because the terms under which they work now are not suitable is completely unfair to the sector, which depends on this. So we argue that enhancing conditions of work and offering decentralized, sustainable, environmentally friendly and economically efficient waste collection models, which integrate large numbers of waste pickers, is a much better way to ensure that their work is not only continued and they're not displaced, but it's also enhanced where they have better terms of work. And where I come back to the SWaCH model, in a city like Pune, where every individual and every waste picker also has an opinion and an opinion of their own. It's a very opinionated city. Every citizen who gets a little engaged with issues wants to engage with what waste collection systems, what waste management systems, what the SWM system should look like. And everyone has alternate models. Many of them will argue fairly articulately, and I include corporators, elected representatives and municipal administrators in this, who will argue that the SWaCH model, which depends on a user fee, where a waste picker goes around house to house and gets a user fee from the citizen and the access to the dry waste and a slew of welfare benefits, that this model actually does not give the worker as much as a contract-based minimum wage model will look like. And they will argue that we want to actually move to a contractual system, but we will ensure the same waste pickers are taken in that. The reasons for this are many. There definitely are very strong vested interest in contract models, and that's why municipalities across the board want to promote them. There are cutbacks which are simply not ever going to be an option in a decentralized model like SWaCH, which is a low cost, low carbon footprint model. So different kinds of people are going to promote different kinds of model for various kinds of vested interest. There are also perhaps some truly well-meaning people who believe that an 8-hour workday, which offers a minimum wage for a waste picker, is likely to be a better model for the city and for the worker herself. I'm willing to grant that there might be some truly well-meaning people who think that. But the strongest argument that a waste picker who's part of SWaCH will make is that she would much rather have her autonomy, her flexibility, and her agency, which is not possible in a contractor-driven model. I hope that's answered most of the questions.
Thank you. I think it has, and let's hope your fight for the SWaCH model continues. But as we know from many cities, there is a real desire to have these contract models with these big companies. And part of the reason, as we well know, is that it also involves a lot of kickbacks. So, and the SWaCH model is clean and honest. So that always is an issue. I am going to move to Manali Ben. Manali Ben, you did describe a very nice example of success. I want you to talk about, we have the Street Vendors Act since 2014 actually. What should cities do now, given the act? That's one question. You answer that, then I'll come to the next.
Manali ma'am, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I think there are 3 or 4 steps to implement this Street Vendors Act. One is that it needs to be implemented uniformly in all the state cities to protect the livelihood of the vendor. Second, I will give you some figures that many states have framed the state rules, but the town vending committee has not been constituted. So very first step is that the every city should first of all they frame the rules, and then they constitute the town vending committee in their city. So I have just some figures that only 7 to 3 towns from 30 states have made town vending committee, out of which 33 is notified. Out of 33 notified TVCs, town vending committee, only 50 of town vending committees has issued identity card. So there is a need to constitute the town vending committee in all the cities and make them functional. Second, very important step is the mapping exercise. Survey should be undertaken by the town vending committees. So all the vendors can be provided certificate of vending. And the third is that there is a need to constitute multi-stakeholders committee comprised of unions of street vendors by Urban Development Authority. And this committee should meet every 6 months to monitor the implementation of the Street Vending Act. So these are 3 to 4 steps which I recommend.
Thank you. And now let me get to the questions that have been asked for you. First is a question that how can urban design and planning, city planning, actually contribute to the betterment of vendors? Then the the other questions all relate to women vendors, because vending is both men and women. So do you have any knowledge? And I think we don't actually. How many women vendors have? I know this, I know the answer to that. That's right. How many women vendors have actually got the advantage of Swanidhi, the 10,000 rupees in the country?
I think so, it is on the, I don't know, but
so I do
guess
know it's on
that
the website. It's on the website, yeah. But they don't do a male-female breakup.
Okay.
Don't. So yeah, the answer to that is we don't know how many have got it because they never do a male-female breakup. And only certain states I heard getting large numbers of Swanidhi benefits, and some states are not getting it all. Then the other questions relating to women vendors. Can you tell what is the kind of access that women vendors have to benefits under the Act? For example, and this is my addition, for example, and this is not just for Ahmedabad, but overall in India. Are women part of the PVC? Are they taking women as part of the town vending committees? Are they giving women identity cards or space? So that's the second thing. And the third thing is, do you find that, especially for women vendors, there may be more violence against them in some way, whether it is sexual violence or other type of violence, and also discrimination against women vendors?
So first I will answer your question on violence. Yes, they do face the violence they are beaten up by the police many a times. So I remember one incident. So in one of the natural market, police came and they asked for the vegetables free. So he don't want to pay anything for the vegetables, and it was summer, so the vegetables were costly. So then this vendor said that no, I will not give you this vegetable in free. And he was so angry that he took his cart and then he pushed it in the truck. He put it in the truck, and that woman was crying and shouting that, oh, look at my baby. She had tied her baby under this cart, and we were there, and we just jumped onto the truck, and then we just give that baby to the vendor, that women vendor, and also we gave that cart back to the vendor. So this vendor, especially the women vendors, are facing this type of violence every day. So that's why organizing is very important. The only way is organizing. So that is my answer. And I think Jignasa ban can also add into it. Jignasa ban, સવાલ એવું છે કે બહેનો જે વેચનાર, ખાસ કરીને જે વેચનાર બહેનો છે, તો તેમને આવા પોલીસના કે કોઈના પણ વાયલન્સનો ભોગ બનવું પડે છે, અને તમે કહી શકો એના ઉપાયો પણ.
હા, ગુજરાતીમાં તો
તમને હિન્દી આવતો હોય તો હિન્દી જ બોલજો ને,
એટલે ટ્રાન્સલેટ ના કરવું પડે કદાચ.
થોડું કરવું પડશે પણ વધારે લોકો સમજે.
हाँ, उनको वायलेंस होता है वेंडर्स को भी, कि पुलिस आती है, पुलिस कई बार दूसरी कलम लगा के भी बहनों को ले जाती है पकड़ के। और कभी कभी तो कानून में है कि अगर आप लेडीज को ले जाते हो तो लेडीज पुलिस ही चाहिए, लेकिन तभी भी अभी तो हमने बहनों को जागरूक किया, लेकिन अभी भी कई जगह है कि जहां बहनों को पुलिस वाले खुद पकड़ के ले जाते हैं और उनको छूते हैं, तो वही भी होता है उनके साथ। और दूसरा के जो वो बोलते हैं, वो उनकी समझ में ऐसा है कि जो वेंडर्स बहनें रोड पे रास्ते पे जो बैठ के वेंडर्स का काम करती है, तो उनकी सोच में अभी भी वो लोगों को कई बार भाषा से, शब्दों से ऐसा बोलते हैं, तो बहनों को भी कभी कभार बहुत ही हम महसूस होता है मन में कि हम ऐसे थोड़ी है। बहनों को गाली गलौज भी करते हैं पुलिस वाले, ऐसा नहीं है कि उनको नाम से देखे, लेकिन अभी भी जागरूकता लानी भी है और हमारे लिए बहुत सारा संघर्ष है जीवन में आगे भी, कि जो कानून बना है उसका अमलीकरण भी करवाना है और बहनों को जागरूक करना है। हम कायदा की तालीम देकर उनको जागरूक करते हैं कि हमारे लिए क्या क्या कानून है बहनों के लिए। और हमारे कानून में एक तो हमको किया कि हमको हमारी सर्वे हुआ और हमको आइडेंटिटी कार्ड, जो हमारी पहचान है, जो मेरे पास है, वो हमको मिला है। तो इससे भी हमें कुछ हम गर्व महसूस करते हैं कि हम भी एक वेचनार है और हमारे भी कुछ आइडेंटिटी है।
Right. I can quickly translate if you want. Dignasaban mentioned that vendors also face a lot of violence. Police also put a lot of false allegations and arrest them. There's a law that only women police can arrest women. However, that's not followed in many places, and male police come and harass them, arrest them, and they face a lot of violence. She said there's a lot of abusive language used against women street vendors, and there's still a lot of struggle to implement the law. They are already doing a lot of awareness programs around it, and she's also shown us the identity card which they've received through the law. The survey was conducted, and she said she's very proud of receiving this identity card. Thank you.
Manali, there was a question on how urban design and planning can help.
Oh, great. So I think, as I gave you the example of Bhadra Heritage Natural Market, where we involve the street vendors. The street vendors, police, and the municipal corporation sit together, and then they have shown us the space that this much you will get. But then all these three sit together, and then they have decided how much space we should allocate it to each street vendor, and they sit with the architect also, and they have made the plan. So it's really good. So that is one thing. So, and the second thing is that if we include 2% of the public space for the vendors in all urban plans, that would be really helpful to the street vendors. Second is that regularizing the existing vendors in the natural market in a planned manner. That is by making schematic plan and by recognizing vendors. And third is that city infrastructure projects should be planned and undertaken in the participatory process with the affected sector, like street vendors. And the fourth is that the inclusion of natural market in the newer area which are developing in the city, and provision of the natural market in the new town planning schemes. And lastly, the issue of the street vendor should be not seen in the isolation, but all the stakeholders and the authorities like municipal corporation, police, city planners, and the representatives of the street vendors, that means unions, should get together to find out they should sit together and find out the solution on the issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manali Ben, Jignasa Ben. And now actually we have only about 15 minutes left. So I will now go to Nalini Ben on domestic workers. And Nalini Ben, you did talk about what type of policy is required. If you want to say anything more on that, but what would be really nice is if you could also talk about one step forward or some success that the campaign, that the platform has achieved. And when you've done that, then I have one question for you. I might as well tell you the question. The question is, there are also male domestic workers, and we have been talking about female domestic workers. What would you like to say? Are they part of your campaign? How do they interact? What is the difference? Can you say something about that?
Yeah, I'll start with the fact that it's true there are male domestic workers. Most of us work with the females because they are the majority. But there are some unions that do have male domestic workers. But, you know, particularly in SEWA, we are a women's union and we work mainly with women. And I must say that in India, somehow, most of the unions that are members of the platform work with women domestic workers. From your other questions that you asked, Renana Ben, sorry, I was busy getting my mic set. Would you say the first question again, please?
The first was not really a question. This was the only question in the question and answers. But I think, unless I missed something. But what I said was, what we didn't hear from you was some success story. Something that by organizing, if you had made a difference. Have you made a difference? Can you give an example?
Okay. You know, our main ideas has been how workers would get first an identity as a domestic worker. So the fact that, you know, when they join a union, they get an ID card actually really helps them when they go to work. So we've had instances where, you know, and I explain, maybe I'll give you two examples. One was when on Domestic Workers' Day, for instance, which is the 16th of June, when the convention was achieved by the domestic workers, the ILO Convention 189 is celebrated as Domestic Workers' Day. And on that particular day, workers from everywhere organize. And we have been organizing what we call a My Fair Home campaign. So domestic workers, you know, get together in front of their employers' buildings. And then we try to have an interaction with employers, because we think it's not that all employers are, you know, negate the identity or the respect for the domestic workers. But if we create an atmosphere where they can negotiate, where they can talk as human beings, then we find that employers are far more open to domestic workers. So through the My Fair Home campaign, where we have this interaction, collective kind of interaction, because you have domestic workers standing outside the building with all their posters, placards and things. And then the domestic workers who work inside the building will go in with their little card for demands, say it is Domestic Workers' Day, and they will speak with their own employers about what domestic workers, the rights of domestic workers. And I remember one of the domestic workers who said that she had this card, but she didn't know what it was written in because she couldn't read. And she gave it to the employer and said, "Can you read this to me?" And so the employer read the whole thing to her, and then they started a conversation. And we know that several domestic workers have got increased wages just by an interaction of this kind in many places. The other example we have is for the interstate migrant domestic workers, because we've been working on these corridors from where women migrate. So for instance, in the home area and the area of destination, we've been organizing workers in the home states. For instance, in Orissa, in particular pockets where domestic workers migrate, where they've been organized, they've got their ID cards. And then we have this wonderful experience of workers who went from Orissa to Mumbai. And after getting their ID cards, knowing about the union, becoming members of union, knowing about their rights, and they were live-in workers in Mumbai. And one of the workers, after 3 months of work, was told she could go. There was no reason given to her for why she had to go. So she was kind of homeless, jobless, and she phoned the organizer back in her village where she had become a union member. So the organizer said, look, you are 6 of you from here who are there. You just phone the others and you go together to the employer with your ID cards and you tell the employer you belong to a union and you'll get your wages. So they did exactly that. 4 of them went to the employer. They first chatted. They said, look, did she work here? What was her, why did you dismiss her? And she made up a story. She said she had stolen. There was no such story at all. And so they said, well, if you are sending her off, you have to give her 3 months wages. We don't mind, she can find other work, but you haven't paid her 3 months wages. So she said, yeah, but then she stole. But they said, no, this is not true. She hasn't stolen. And then they took out their ID cards and said, look, we belong to this union. And if you don't pay her, we go to the police. So the employer immediately went in. She brought out 30,000 rupees and gave it to them and sent them away. So, there are experiences like this. We have, also other experiences in local areas where workers joined together because a domestic worker she was stopped from her work. So they all organized and said, we won't let anybody else go and work in that area unless that employer pays the woman for the day she worked there. So there have been several things like this where workers have succeeded, some gains from organizing.
Thank you, Nalini Ben. And I think that's the lesson of this webinar, that there are always gains from organizing. And that's the only way to go forward. And Janhavi Ben, you have the last word. There are 2 questions for you, which I'll say. And then if you can end with one success story from you, of course, you have experience in so many countries, anywhere that you would like. But let me just say the 2 questions. One is that home-based workers who are like work on the contract, can they become entrepreneurs in their own right? And the second question is that some of these economic activities that they do at home must be having hazards. And what are some of those hazards from the economic activity?
Sure. So I'll quickly talk about the fact that, because there was not enough time, I didn't dwell upon the 2 categories of home-based workers. One are the piece rate workers who are part of the supply chain, but the other category, which is much larger, is the own account home-based workers who have direct access to raw material and the markets. They're also treated as entrepreneurs. So this is a category, but what we've seen is also it's a very vulnerable category of workers. Only when they come together as cooperatives or producer companies, they are able to actually continue with their work for a longer period of time. In fact, during the pandemic also, what we've seen is members who are part of cooperatives and producer companies are recovering much faster than other piece rate home-based workers. I also want to add a little bit here is, many of the government programs are focusing on entrepreneurship and everything, but just to say, individual workers, informal economy workers are not able to work very well as entrepreneurs. I sometimes feel it's a way of washing their hands off for social security, social protection programs by calling them entrepreneurs. The other question you talked about was about economic activity and the hazards. Occupational safety and health is a big issue for home-based workers, right? It is a reality, but the other fact is most home-based workers are not working in the hazardous industry. The impact is more on themselves. So say, for example, agarbatti makers sit on the floor and make those agarbattis and have severe backaches. Garment workers, some of the fiber that goes into their breathing, and they have a lot of issues. But if the question is about hazardous industries, most home-based workers are not part of it. Some are, I don't want to deny that, but most are not. Especially the organized home-based workers, we try and have a lot of training around OSH. Yeah. So last question, Renana, you'd asked about one success story. We've had, in the past, some of the programs on creating city dialogues. And what we found was that home-based workers and their organizations find this urban planning issue to be very daunting. It's very, overwhelming. They go and talk to the city officials and they give them some technical, brief, and they're generally very overwhelmed by that. And that's why we created this partnership where our technical partner was Mahila Housing SEWA Trust. And we had other partner, local organization who primarily worked on livelihoods issue, but Mahila Housing SEWA Trust built their capacity not only on technical issues, but also to form community-based organizations where they could engage, create these city dialogues with local officials. Now, the gains were much better in tier 2 cities. No surprises there. Mumbai is a difficult place to work in, but tier 2 cities were much better. We also saw some very good, successes in cities like Bhubaneswar. We did a small impact study there, not large survey, but just, some micro data. I won't bore you with too many details, but 3 points. One was that, once home-based workers had individual water tap, these were masala makers, their productive time to work increased by 2 hours per day, which is quite big for them. The second area where Mahila Housing SEWA Trust worked with this organization called Road, they provided sewage, and garment workers had 3 months of additional work, which they didn't do during monsoons because their house was generally waterlogged for almost 45 days. The third was around, we also heard about better health outcomes and reduction in health expenses by almost 2/3. So this was one of the successes. Just one last word I'd like to say, because Asya yesterday mentioned that, if we have policy recommendations, the big policy recommendations are these urban policies and housing policies have to talk to the livelihoods. And the livelihood policies, when we are pushing for it, we have to put a section on housing and access to basic services and all of that. She'd also mentioned the fact that, these community participation, there's always a community participation aspect, and generally women are not represented there. Why can't we have worker representation on those spaces? I'll stop here. Thank you, Renana.
Thank you, Janhavi, and you ended on a great note, which I think is true for all the informal workers and for women informal workers, the whole issue of representation when urban policies are made. And behind that, again, is the issue of organizing. We are exactly time now, and I think we will have to end. This has been a really, really rich discussion, and I think our participants really enjoyed it. Can I hand this back to Kirti Bhai to end the webinar?
Yeah, thank you, Renana. This is our 34th webinar, as we started saying. And I wanted to kind of make 2 comments on the quality of this webinar. One is one of the coordinators and organizer of this event. I thought this was one of the best. And as someone who heard every word of 34 webinars, which is 68 hours, I would like to say this is the best webinar we have had in 6 months. And I've absolutely no doubt in saying that. Why am I saying that? I was just trying to kind of put words in terms of thinking. So I said, hey, this webinar is informative, is thoughtful, is insightful, is inspiring, is enabling, is empowering, and is enriching. And believe me, I want to say from the heart, it is enriching not professionally, it is enriching spiritually. And it's very, very important thing to say, because all along, we are not talking about cities as places, we are talking about cities as people. And this is an incredibly rich in terms of what it could be. What is also very interesting is this, that this webinar is all women webinar. And not only 5 women, we have listed only 5. As a matter of fact, it has been 10 women webinar, and other 5 whose name do not appear in the banner and the poster made as good, as lasting, as impressive contribution that you 5 people did, who that is absolutely stunning. So let me first start with thanking all of you personally with names. And therefore, Jignasha Ben, Rekha Ben, Pratima Ben, Surekha Ben, and Aisha Ben, थैंक यू. बहुत बहुत अच्छा बताया आपने. ये जो मीटिंग है उसको आपने बहुत ही बड़ा स्पेशल कलर दिया. You brought in enormous amount of heart into the whole process of dealing with this whole thing. Of course, I must thank Renana Ben. You've been absolutely stunning. You played a big role in organizing this. I have no words to thank you. And of course, an incredibly rich, enlightened panel. And thank you, Nalini ji. I have known her for close to 50 years. Janhavi ji, I think saw you first time. You have been simply remarkable. Not only, I think, in terms of work you're doing, and I have some work I'll just talk about, but as an incredibly capable translator, I was just stunned by what you did. Lakshmi ji, terrific. And all that you said, your passion came through without question. And of course, Malini Ben, I have been there for a very long time. I have known her for a very long time and got lots of inspiration. Now, I want to take, even though it's getting late, I want to take a few more minutes to bring a few of things that we are trying to do and trying to see whether you could become partners. First is, many of you will not even know, and I'm sure Renana might know, but 30 years ago, Government of India had put together a National Commission on Urbanization. This was done by Rajiv Gandhi. And believe me, it was one commission set up by government, secretariat sitting in Prime Minister's office. It did not have one single government person. All 10 people who were selected were civil society people, outsiders. And it produced one of the best ever document on urbanization and urban future in this country. Point one is making is this, that if you're talking about sustainable cities, if you're talking about inclusive cities, if you're talking about people caring cities, you've got to bring in people in the whole process. No, I'm one of the few, only probably surviving member of the National Commission on Urbanization that happened 30 years ago. 2 years ago, we have sent a proposal to Government of India to set up a second National Commission on Urbanization, saying urban issues have become much more complex, urban population is double, there is a great need to think through Indian urbanization processes and urban challenge, and please put together a commission of people like you who would think about cities. I have had no success. We want your help in pushing that through. This is number one. greater innovation in this thought process is this, that urbanization is essentially a state subject. It is, everything is happening in this country for last 50 years, guided and controlled and managed by the national government. Urbanization, housing is essentially a state subject. And therefore we took an initiative and sent a proposal to government of Gujarat last year. And that's what, this is not just an idea. This is a 20-page full-length proposal. Why, how, what is to be done. That is, everyone tells me it's a good idea, it's not happening. And I really want your support to back this up. But these are two macro initiatives. I thought your combined power, your combined compassion could help. It's completely needed. I don't think this country can go, if we mismanage our urban challenge, we would put large number of people at disadvantage, and we will badly affect the economy of this country if cities are the engines of growth, as we know they are. That's the two things. Third thing is a micro thing, and I really want your help on this, especially Janhavi ji, I'm going to talk about this. We launched last year a very interesting competition for architects, planners, civil society, NGOs. It is called Improving Livability of Small Houses. It's tragic in this country. Millions of houses are being built under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana and under Housing for All. No one is carefully designing them. If you're building 300 square foot houses, and as the Behenji talked about earlier, you require space for your living, you require space for your working. Even if there's a 300 square foot, it's possible to improve livability and workability of these houses. And you require people's wisdom in this more than architects and planners. We have relaunched this competition a few months ago, withdrew it because of pandemic, and are coming in the market again in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I want your help, because I don't think it's architect, and it's very interesting in design competition. I'm not talking about design. We're talking about taking existing projects, and we are talking about 2 examples of people having improved livability of their houses, be that slum. So want to come back to you, Janhavi Ben. I want to kind of take it globally and see what could be done. So this is the third thing. And the fourth thing I want from you is, I was chairing a commission to improve building centers in the country a few years ago. And as a part of that, we started looking at women skilled construction workers. It's amazing. You don't find a woman as a mason. You don't find women as a carpenter. You don't find women as plumber. You don't find women as, and they have enormous skills. And there is no good reason why this should not happen. We are trying to kind of put together a proposal, a project, where we look at this, and it's a problem with the construction industry. It's the biases against women. All that is working. It's a long story. I don't want to kind of repeat it here, but I'm saying this is one example to be looked into. Because if women, and women are in construction. As a matter of fact, no one says, they are, I think, they cannot take their most difficult task in a construction project, and I'm an architect, I should know, is done by women. Why can't they do? And they have skills in their fingers. And therefore, looking at the whole system, the whole organization, the whole environmental kind of thing is something that is required to be done. We are trying to kind of develop something on this. And I thought your help, your insight, your tremendous organizational ability would be helpful to get this thing done. So please don't say no, say yes. And I think, we'll get back to you on all the four. And before I end, let me kind of say that the next webinar takes place on 9th of December, which is 35th. And that is once again on homelessness and right to the city in Indian cities. And is going to be anchored by Shivani Chaudhary, who is with Housing and Land Housing Networks. So thank you very, very much for this incredibly rich webinar. Believe me, I think all the effort one put together in organizing 34, and we'd organize 10 more, was worthwhile. Just having one like this today, enormously rich. And thank you very much for making it so rich and touching and moving. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirtibai, for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nayak. Thank you. Janhavi Ben, I'll write you and see, I think, and how, because I really wanted international.
Sure. And Bijal Ben is also involved in this. So they've also done some work in Nepal with us. So it might be good to keep them also involved, engaged.
Yeah. I think, what I'm trying to say is this, that myself have done huge amount of work internationally. And I think, we should get this going tremendously. Good. And Renana, I have sent you that letter that I read to the Prime Minister on National Commission Urbanization. They're not interested in people. They're not interested in the stories. But we've got to find a way to kind of get around so that people get into the processes, to... You see, inclusive cities are not going to happen in the way we are going about it. Inclusivity is this point of time is a slogan. And to convert into reality, much has to happen at that. It's really, and it's also a slogan to say it's bottom up. But just imagine this, I was just thinking myself, this meeting brought out 40-year history of movement and challenges and struggle. Just close your eyes for a second and say, if these individuals and organizations were not there, where would be in this country in the context of poor and the working class? It's enormous, the contribution that is coming from activists and NGOs and civil society. It's huge. And it has to be recognized, it has to be supported, it has to be, I think, given a place to operate.
Yeah.
And we are not talking about small numbers. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of people and their lives and their livelihood, and they're being dignified citizens.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank